Hey, what's good everybody? Welcome to episode 4 of my Bitwig review. Today we're going to be looking at the polygrid. Now, the grid is one of Bitwig's most robust features as far as what sets itself apart as a unique DAW. Even though other DAWs might have some modular environments, I think that this one in particular is much more streamlined and easier to use. So if you're brand new to any kind of modular system or you don't know what that is, just stick around for a bit and I'll explain it. But the way that it's laid out and the way that it's integrated within Bitwig on its own right is pretty amazing. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So by nature, the polygrid is a synth or effect that can fit on right to the rack. And what that basically means is that you can use the modules that is native to Bitwig, and you can also stack effects before or after this. So if you want to combine different types of sound design methodologies, then that's an amazing option as well. If we go ahead and open this up, this is what we get as a default preset. And by nature, everything from the grid is stereo. One cool thing that I really enjoy about this, aside from its really pretty interface, is the fact that I don't have to set up any MIDI inputs in order to be able to use this. I can just play this. You can't really hear that right off the bat. And basically, as long as we understand any idea about routing whenever we're doing some kind of synthesis, we can basically combine some of these modules that we have in order to create something that goes from simple to more complex, except we're doing everything completely from scratch. Normally from something like a subtractive synthesizer, this kind of setup is already set up with a source, some kind of output controller, and to your general output. But for this, we basically have control over doing everything from beginning, end, and in between. So one thing I want you to pay attention to is if I click on this, on any of these modules actually, sometimes you might notice that over here on the left, you'll have some of these features. And I highly recommend that you click over here because you might see that there's some customization that you can do within all of the modules themselves. In fact, if you click on the polygrid, we have some different voicing options, and then we also have some phase options in case if you want to do something like a drone or a generator or something of the like where the sound continues even when you're not playing something. And that's really easy to do. All you have to do is let go of an envelope and you'll see that now we've basically created a drone. And the way that this signal flow goes is, again, the oscillator, the envelope, or the sound controller of some sort, if you will, into the output. And all we have to do to make this more complex is to jump into this thing and find some things to add, kind of around that whole idea. And we'll do that in just a second. By nature, the grid is mostly used for just about anything that you can imagine. If you want to do a bass, you can do that. If you want to do a lead or something that you can play on your keys, that's available. But we can also do, again, different kinds of drones. We can do different kinds of sequencers. And it's really just up to your imagination to be able to kind of create what you will. Now, personally, I don't really do sound design this way, and my understanding of it is on a very rudimentary sense of just understanding signal flow, but hopefully this introduction to you can kind of like give you some ideas about how to expand. And then towards the end of the video, I'll show you a complex patch made from Polarity, which you should definitely check out if you are into this kind of sound design. With all that stuff being said, let's go ahead and talk about how this actually works. I mentioned that I really enjoy the graphical user interface of this because it's incredibly saturated and it's very easy for me to tell where my routing is going. We can kind of see where that is by basically the connected wires or the connected lines from each module from one to another. Some functions that I really enjoy using on this is if I right click, anything that's related to the oscillator type will kind of pull up right here, so we can change that to a sawtooth. And if I come over here and right click, you can also see that there are these different modular archetypes that you can select from as you can replace with, and that can be pretty handy if you want to kind of switch up the sound. So if I wanted to switch that up to a pluck, all I have to do is right click. Now, if this isn't going into anything or not connected to anything, then it's receiving MIDI, and you can see that that's happening right there, but because nothing is connected, we're not getting any sound from it. So we want to make sure to kind of place whatever we want to go into the output into the ADSR or maybe straight in again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on this and hit Option and create a duplicate of this. And I basically want to figure out how to create a Reese. So what I'm going to do is go into the mix function and hit blend, and I'm going to highlight this over here, and as you can see, when the white square is highlighted, it will automatically place this in connection with the other modules that is already there. So that's how you can kind of like just easily place this in between a signal flow that makes things really easy. So now we have two sources that are going into one signal, and now what I'm going to do is detune them a bit. And just like that, we have a Reese. And from this point on, it really kind of just depends on like where you want to go with this. I mean, if you want to turn this into something like a Hoover, we can detune this more, we can stack more effects onto this, we can add some randomizations or do all the different kinds of things that you normally would. For example, if I wanted to add a randomizer to something, I'm going to delete this, but just so you can see, we can still place things right here in such a way that is still native to the actual plugin itself. So one thing that I am going to do just to make this a little bit more interesting is I'm going to grab a shaper and go into the saturator. I'm going to click that right here. And then if I click on the saturator right here, you can see that this has some functionality over here on the left panel. So let's turn the makeup gain up a bit. And now we've got an excellent clean signal that sounds more so of an analog type feel. Of course, it's still digital, but they really tried to give you the option to make this sound as authentic as possible, and I definitely appreciate that. So from this point on, all you really have to do is kind of figure out, you know, how you want to shape your sound within the grid, and then you can do a lot of, I mean, the world is your oyster with this, to be honest. For me personally, I would tend to reach for outside external effects, but just as far as making a super simple patch, you can tell that the complexity or that the capabilities that you have, the customization is accessible but also incredibly deep. So with all that being said, this is a super easy base, nothing too major. Let's go ahead and actually pull up a patch that is really complex, and I'll show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. So this, my friends, is an awesome patch developed by Polarity, and this is what it looks like. I actually have a video up of me recreating this from scratch. I didn't make it out of the blue. I definitely looked at a picture of this while I was creating it, but as you can tell, there's a lot of things that are going on within this that creates some incredible soundscaping possibilities. One cool thing that I wanted to point out with this, just because it's a better example, is the fact that you can actually use a granular sampler as a source within Bitwig, and you can even right click this and change it into a multi-sample, which is absolutely bonkers. So while there are some generative things that are pretty complex, and as you can see there is a bunch of randomization happening, everything is still going to one single output, which is right here. And don't worry, I don't expect you to be able to point that out or be able to see it if this is the first time that you've ever looked at something like this. But as you can tell, there's a lot of generative things, a lot of randomization, there's a lot of layers that's happening through all this to create a super complex sound. But again, it all kind of starts from the very beginning of having a single source and expanding upon it. So with all that being said, I know that this was a super simple introduction to the polygrid, but I wanted to show you how interesting and how fun it can be for you to kind of just get lost within this modular sandbox. And if you guys want to, again, explore more of this stuff, I highly recommend, again, going to Polarity's channel. I'll leave a link in the description. And that's all I got for you guys. In the next video, I'll show you how this can be used as an effect, where we'll expand on this. And until then, I will see you next time.